My name is Lauren, and this is the story of how my life unraveled and how I eventually took it back. I never imagined I'd be sitting here, writing all of this out, but sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and we're left picking up the pieces. It all started the summer I turned 17. My dad, Michael, had remarried a few years earlier to a woman named Deborah. With Deborah came her daughter, Emily, my new stepsister. Emily was a few years younger than me, 14 at the time, and while we weren't close, I never anticipated the chaos she would bring into my life. That summer, my dad decided we needed a family trip to bond. He booked a week at a beach resort in Clearwater, Florida. I wasn't thrilled about it. I had a part-time job I liked and a few close friends I didn't want to leave behind, but saying no wasn't an option. My dad didn't take well to being challenged. The resort wasn't as glamorous as the photos had promised. The rooms were small and the beach was crowded and noisy. Worst of all, I was stuck sharing a room with Emily. From the moment we arrived, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Emily had a way of making me feel small without even saying much. She'd roll her eyes at me, complain about having to share a bathroom, and make snide comments under her breath. By the second day, things boiled over. We got into a stupid argument. I can't even remember what it was about. Something trivial, like who got to use the hairdryer first or who left a mess in the bathroom. But it escalated quickly. Emily threw a pillow at me, and I shot back a sarcastic remark. That was the beginning of the end. After that fight, Emily gave me the silent treatment for the rest of the trip. At first, I thought it was kind of funny. I figured she'd get over it soon enough, but I underestimated just how far Emily was willing to go. When we got back home, things took a strange turn. My dad and Deborah started acting differently toward me. They weren't outright mean, but there was a coldness in their behavior that hadn't been there before. My dad barely looked at me when we spoke, and Deborah seemed to be watching me closely, like she was waiting for me to mess up. I brushed it off at first, thinking I was imagining things. But then, little things started happening that I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, I came home from school to find Deborah in my room, rifling through my drawers. When I asked her what she was doing, she gave me a vague excuse about checking something. It felt like a violation, but I didn't know what to say. I stood there, staring at the mess she'd made, feeling confused and unsettled. A few days later, I overheard my dad and Deborah whispering in the kitchen. My name came up multiple times, and their tone was sharp, disapproving. I couldn't make out the entire conversation, but it was clear they were talking about me, and it wasn't good. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe they were just worried about typical teenage stuff, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. And soon enough, I found out what. One night, my dad barged into my room without knocking. His face was red, his eyes blazing with anger. "Where were you last night?" he demanded. I blinked, completely confused. "What? I was here." "Don't lie to me, Lauren," he shouted. "Emily told us she saw you sneaking out again. She said you've been running around with boys and doing drugs. Is that true?" I stared at him, my mouth hanging open. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Emily had made up an entire story, lies upon lies, and my dad believed her. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "I didn't sneak out, and I'm not doing drugs. Why would you believe that?" But he didn't listen. He kept yelling, accusing me of ruining the family, of throwing my future away. Nothing I said mattered. In his eyes, I was already guilty. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. Why would Emily do this? What did she have to gain by destroying my reputation? I thought back to our argument on the trip and wondered if this was her twisted way of getting back at me. The days that followed were a nightmare. My dad treated me like a criminal. Every time I walked through the door, he'd demand to know where I'd been, what I'd been doing, and who I'd been with. If I answered, he didn't believe me. If I stayed quiet, he called me disrespectful and ungrateful. Deborah was just as bad. She would search my room while I was at school, rifling through my things as if she was trying to find evidence of wrongdoing. One time, she confronted me with a small Ziploc bag she'd found in my drawer. "What's this?" she asked, holding it up like it was incriminating evidence. I stared at her, wide-eyed. "It's Tylenol. I had a headache last week." But she didn't believe me. "Don't lie to me, Lauren. What else are you hiding?" "I'm not hiding anything," I snapped, feeling myself lose control. "It's literally Tylenol." Deborah shook her head, disappointment etched on her face. I don't know what's happened to you. You used to be such a good girl. Every day it was the same. Little jabs, little accusations. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, constantly watched and judged. And through it all, Emily just smirked. She wouldn't speak to me, but she made sure I knew she was enjoying every second of my misery. I couldn't take it anymore. I started avoiding the house as much as I could. I stayed late at school and picked up extra shifts at my part-time job. Anything to stay away from that toxic environment. But no matter how much I tried to escape, the damage was done. My dad saw me as a lost cause, and Deborah treated me like a delinquent. Emily had successfully turned my life upside down, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. Looking back, I realized that was the moment everything changed. It wasn't just about Emily's lies. It was about my family's choice to believe her over me. They had already decided who I was in their story, and nothing I said would ever change that. That realization broke something in me, but it also planted the seed of something else, something stronger. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the beginning of my journey to take back my life, to reclaim my future from the wreckage Emily had left behind. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. No matter what I did, I was always guilty in their eyes. I walked through the house like a ghost, barely speaking to anyone, my nerves on edge every second. It felt like I was waiting for the next accusation to drop, like a prisoner waiting for their sentence. And Emily? She was thriving in the chaos she'd created. She stopped giving me the silent treatment, but not in the way I'd hoped. Instead, she made sure to be loud and present whenever our parents were around, flashing her innocent smile and playing the perfect daughter. She'd help Deborah with dinner, chat with my dad about school, and throw in little comments about how she was worried about me. I saw Lauren come home late last night, she'd say casually over dinner. She looked really upset. I think she's been hanging out with some older kids. My dad would glance at me, his jaw tightening, while Deborah would sigh and shake her head. I just don't know what's gotten into her, Deborah would say. She used to be so responsible. It was maddening. No matter how much I tried to explain myself, no one believed me. They'd already decided I was the problem. And Emily was their little informant. She'd drop her lies like breadcrumbs, leading them further and further away from the truth. One night, I came home from work later than usual. I'd picked up an extra shift to avoid going back to that suffocating house. As soon as I walked through the door, I knew something was off. My dad was waiting for me in the living room, arms crossed, his expression dark. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice cold. "At work," I replied, pulling out my time card as proof. I picked up an extra shift. He didn't even glance at it. "Emily said she saw you sneaking out with a boy earlier today." I felt my blood boil. "She's lying. I was at school all day and then went straight to work. You can call my manager if you don't believe me." "I don't need to call anyone," he snapped. "I trust my family." I stared at him, the words stinging more than I wanted to admit. "And what am I then?" He hesitated for a moment before saying, "You're not the girl I raised." Those words echoed in my mind for days. I wasn't the girl he raised. What did that even mean? I'd always been responsible, always tried to do the right thing. But in his eyes, I'd become some delinquent because of Emily's lies. I stopped trying to defend myself after that. What was the point? They weren't interested in hearing my side of the story. They'd made their choice. And it wasn't me. The turning point came a few weeks later. I came home from school to find Deborah waiting for me at the door, her arms crossed, a smug look on her face. "We need to talk," she said. I followed her into the living room, already dreading whatever was coming next. My dad was sitting on the couch looking tired and defeated. Emily stood in the corner, pretending to be concerned but barely hiding her smirk. "We've decided that things can't go on like this," Deborah began. "You've been sneaking around, lying to us and making everyone miserable. This can't continue." I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. "I haven't done anything wrong." My dad shook his head. "Lauren, we've given you every chance to come clean. Emily told us everything. She saw you sneaking out again last night." I laughed bitterly. "Emily is lying. She's been lying this whole time and you've just been eating it up." "That's enough," Deborah snapped. "We won't tolerate this behavior anymore. If you can't follow the rules of this house, then maybe you shouldn't be living here." I froze, the air knocked out of me. "Are you kicking me out?" My dad wouldn't meet my eyes. "You need to think about your actions, Lauren. We're not saying you can't come back, but you need to show us that you're willing to change." Change? I repeated, my voice trembling with anger. Change into what? Someone who lets Emily walk all over me? Someone who accepts being treated like a criminal for things I didn't do? You need to take responsibility for your behavior, Deborah said firmly. And until you're ready to do that, you're not welcome here. I stood there for a moment, stunned. They weren't just taking Emily's side, they were cutting me out entirely. Over lies. I grabbed my backpack and headed for the door. As I passed Emily, she gave me a small, triumphant smile. Good luck out there, she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was too angry, too hurt. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. I spent the next few days crashing on my friend Megan's couch. She didn't ask too many questions, which I appreciated. I told her my family and I were having issues and left it at that. I wasn't ready to talk about the full extent of what had happened, but every night as I lay awake on her couch, the same thoughts ran through my head. How did it come to this? How had my dad and Deborah believed Emily's lies so easily? What had I done to deserve being cast out like this? The worst part was that I still loved them. Despite everything, they were my family. I wanted to believe that deep down, they cared about me, that this was some kind of mistake that could be fixed. But the longer I stayed away, the more I realized that wasn't true. They had made their choice, and it wasn't me. After a week at Megan's, I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I found a cheap, run-down studio apartment in a sketchy part of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had a space that was entirely my own. No one could come in uninvited. No one could rifle through my things, and no one could accuse me of things I hadn't done. It should have felt freeing, but instead, it just felt lonely. I tried to throw myself into work and school, keeping myself busy so I wouldn't have time to dwell on the past. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. My own family had turned against me, and I didn't know how to move past it. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message that changed everything. It was from Liam, Emily's ex-boyfriend from high school. We hadn't spoken in years, so when his name popped up on my phone, I nearly dropped it. I stared at the screen for a long time, debating whether to open the message. Finally, curiosity got the best of me. I opened it. Hey, Lauren, I know we haven't talked in forever, but there's something you need to know about Emily. My heart started pounding. I typed back a quick response. What are you talking about? Liam's reply came almost immediately, and when I read it, my hands started shaking. She confessed everything. She admitted she made up all those stories about you sneaking out and doing drugs. She said she was jealous and wanted to get you in trouble. I'm really sorry, Lauren. I didn't know what she did to you. I sat there staring at my phone, my mind racing. After all these years, Emily had finally admitted it. Everything she'd put me through, everything I'd lost, had been over a petty, jealous lie. By the time my senior year of high school rolled around, my life felt like a constant battle for survival in my own home. I had learned to live in a state of constant tension, never knowing when the next blow would come. I tried to focus on school, on work, on anything that gave me a sense of normalcy, but it wasn't enough. The lies Emily had planted were like weeds, growing stronger with every passing day, strangling any hope I had left. I kept waiting for my dad to wake up, to see through her stories. Surely, at some point, he would realize that none of it made sense. But he never did. If anything, things only got worse. One night, I came home late from my part-time job. I had stayed to help my manager close up, thinking I'd earn some extra cash. When I walked through the front door, my dad was standing there, waiting for me. His arms were crossed, his face set in that familiar look of disappointment that had become all too common. "Where have you been?" he barked. I sighed, exhausted from the day. "Work. I told you I was closing tonight." "Don't lie to me, Lauren. Emily said she saw you sneaking out earlier." I froze. "What? That's not true. I've been at work this whole time." But he wasn't interested in the truth. He never was. He just shook his head, his voice dripping with disgust. "You're throwing your life away. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't see what's going on? You're sneaking around with God knows who, doing God knows what, and you expect me to believe you're just at work?" I stood there, trembling with anger. "Why do you always believe her?" I demanded. "Why do you never ask for my side of the story?" "She wouldn't lie," he snapped back. "Emily is a good girl." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. A good girl. As if I hadn't spent my entire life trying to be just that. responsible, respectful, obedient. But it didn't matter. In his eyes, Emily could do no wrong, and I could do no right. I tried to stay calm, to keep my voice steady. Dad, please, ask my boss, ask anyone at work. I was there all night, but he just waved me off. I don't need to ask anyone. I know what I see. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway, shaking with frustration and disbelief. After that, things spiraled out of control. Deborah started treating me like a criminal under house arrest. She'd ask me where I was going, who I was with, and when I'd be back. If I didn't give her a satisfactory answer, she'd accuse me of hiding something. And Emily, well, she didn't even bother hiding her smirks anymore. Every time she saw me getting grilled by Dad or Deborah, she'd watch from the sidelines, a smug little grin on her face. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew she'd won. One afternoon, I came home to find my room completely ransacked, drawers pulled out, clothes tossed everywhere, my backpack unzipped and emptied. Deborah was standing in the middle of the mess, holding a small baggie in her hand. "What's this?" she demanded. I blinked, confused. "It's Tylenol." "I had a headache the other day." She narrowed her eyes. "Don't lie to me, Lauren." "I'm not lying. It's just Tylenol," I snapped, my voice shaking with anger. "Why are you even in my room?" Deborah ignored my question, her gaze hard and unyielding. "I don't know what's happened to you. You used to be such a good girl." That phrase again. A good girl. Like I hadn't been trying my hardest to hold everything together. Like I wasn't the one constantly walking on eggshells to avoid conflict. Like I wasn't the one being torn apart by lies I didn't know how to fight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. But instead, I just stood there, fists clenched at my sides, swallowing my anger because I knew it wouldn't change anything. After Deborah left my room, I sat on my bed, staring at the chaos she'd left behind. I felt numb, empty. I couldn't understand why they believed Emily over me, why they never gave me the benefit of the doubt, why my own father had turned against me so easily. In the weeks that followed, I withdrew even further. I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped defending myself. What was the point? They'd already made up their minds about who I was. They saw me as a liar, a troublemaker, a disappointment. Nothing I said would change that. The only thing I could do was survive. I threw myself into school and work, spending as little time at home as possible. I avoided conversations with my dad and Deborah, and I made sure to steer clear of Emily. But no matter how much I tried to distance myself, the damage was done. Then came the night that changed everything. I had stayed late at school to finish a group project. By the time I got home, it was already dark. As soon as I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. My dad was waiting for me again, his face red with anger. "Where were you?" he demanded. "I told you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I had a group project. Don't lie to me, Lauren. Emily saw you sneaking out earlier." I stared at him, my heart sinking. "I wasn't sneaking out. I was at school." But he didn't care. He never cared. His voice rose, echoing through the house. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't see what's going on? You're sneaking out doing God knows what, and you're ruining your life." My hands trembled as I tried to hold back tears. "Why do you always believe her? Why don't you ever ask me what's true?" "She wouldn't lie," he said again, his voice cold and final. "She's a good girl." That was it. That was the moment I realized there was nothing I could do, nothing I could say. My own father had already decided who I was, and nothing would change his mind. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tears streaming down my face. I felt like I was drowning, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. My family had turned against me, and I didn't know how to make them see the truth. And through it all, Emily just kept smirking. The night my dad kicked me out is burnt into my memory. I still replay it sometimes, wondering if there was anything I could have said or done differently. But deep down, I know the truth. It wouldn't have mattered. The decision had already been made long before that night. It started like so many other nights had. I came home late from school. I had stayed after hours to finish a project with my group, hoping to avoid the tension at home for as long as possible. As soon as I walked through the front door, I knew something was off. The house was too quiet, too still, like everyone inside was holding their breath. My dad was waiting for me in the hallway. His arms were crossed, his face flushed with anger, and his eyes locked on me the second I stepped inside. "Where were you?" he snapped. I froze, caught off guard. "I told you, I had a group project." "I was at school." Don't lie to me, Lauren. His voice was low, dangerous. Emily saw you sneaking out earlier. Who were you with? My heart sank. I knew it didn't matter what I said. The accusations were already there, carved into his mind like stone. I wasn't sneaking out, I said, my voice trembling with frustration. I've been at school all day. You can call my teacher if you don't believe me. But he didn't care. He never did. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and his voice rose to a shout. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't know what's going on? You've been sneaking out, lying to us, ruining your life. You're a disgrace, Lauren. That word hit me like a slap across the face. Disgrace. It echoed in my mind, drowning out everything else. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I'm not lying, I said, my voice shaking. Why do you always believe her? Why do you never give me the benefit of the doubt? Because she wouldn't lie, he shot back. Emily is a good girl. She cares about this family. I let out a bitter laugh, unable to hold it in any longer. A good girl? She's been lying to you for months, and you're too blind to see it. You've let her poison you against me, and you don't even care. That was the wrong thing to say. My dad's face twisted in rage, his fists clenching even tighter. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he slammed his hand down on the kitchen counter so hard it made the whole house shake. Get out, he said, his voice low and deadly calm. I can't even look at you anymore. You're a disgrace to this family. I stood there, frozen in place, my mind struggling to process what he had just said. Are you serious? I whispered, barely able to get the words out. Get out, he repeated. Pack your things and leave. You're not welcome here anymore. I don't remember much after that. I was on autopilot, grabbing clothes and essentials, stuffing them into a duffel bag with shaking hands. My mind was blank, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat. As I walked down the hallway, I passed Emily's room. She was standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. That same smug smile was on her face, the one I had come to hate. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her expression said it all. I won. I couldn't even look at her. I just kept walking, out the front door and into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap, snapping me out of my daze. I stood on the front porch, clutching my bag, feeling completely lost. Where was I supposed to go? What was I supposed to do? My own family had turned their backs on me, and I had no one to turn to. I ended up crashing on my friend Jessica's couch. We weren't particularly close, but when I texted her saying I had nowhere to go, she didn't hesitate to let me stay. I didn't tell her everything. I couldn't bring myself to explain the whole mess. All I said was that things at home had gotten bad, and I needed some time to figure things out. Jessica didn't press for details. She just handed me a blanket and told me to make myself comfortable. I was grateful for that. Those first few days were the hardest. I felt like I was living in a fog, floating through the world without really being part of it. I went to work, went to school, and came back to Jessica's place, where I'd curl up under a scratchy blanket and stare at the ceiling until I eventually fell asleep. I kept waiting for my dad to call, for Deborah to reach out, for someone, anyone, to tell me they had made a mistake. But the phone never rang. No one reached out. They were done with me. It hurt more than I could put into words. After a week, I knew I couldn't stay at Jessica's forever. I started looking for a place of my own, eventually finding a tiny studio apartment in a rundown part of town. It wasn't much. The walls were thin, the tiles were cracked, and the bathroom sink leaked constantly. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had my own space. No Emily, no accusations, no lies. At first, I thought I'd feel free, but mostly, I just felt alone. The weeks turned into months, and I settled into a new routine. I picked up more shifts at work, barely making enough to cover rent and groceries. I lived off ramen noodles and spent my weekends studying at the library because I couldn't afford Wi-Fi. It wasn't an easy life, but it was better than living under my dad's roof. I tried not to think about my family, but it was impossible. Every night, as I lay in that creaky bed, I replayed everything that had happened. Emily's lies, my dad's accusations, Deborah tearing through my things like I was some sort of criminal. I kept asking myself the same questions, over and over. Why would Emily do this? Why didn't my dad believe me? What had I done to deserve this? I never found any answers. Eventually, life moved on. I finished high school, barely scraping by with my grades, and found a better-paying job at a downtown diner. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Slowly, I started saving a little money and letting myself dream of something better. But no matter how much time passed, the anger inside me never really went away. I tried to push it down to pretend it didn't bother me anymore, but it was always there, simmering beneath the surface. And then, just when I thought I had finally started to move on, everything came crashing back. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. At first, I was going to ignore it, but something made me open it. It was from Liam. I hadn't thought about Liam in years. He was Emily's ex-boyfriend from high school. Tall, quiet, a little awkward. We never really talked much, so seeing his name on my screen was a surprise. The message was short and to the point. "Hey, Lauren. I know we haven't talked in a while, but there's something you need to know about Emily." My heart started pounding. I stared at the message, my mind racing. What could Liam possibly have to say about Emily? Why now after all this time? With shaking hands, I typed back, "What are you talking about?" His response came almost immediately, and when I read it, my world shifted. Liam's message replayed in my head for hours before I worked up the courage to respond. His next reply came quickly, and when I read it, my heart stopped. Emily confessed everything. "She told me she lied about you sneaking out and doing drugs. She made it all up because she was jealous. She thought you were getting too much attention, and she couldn't handle it." "I'm sorry, Lauren. I had no idea what she did to you." "Jealousy? That's what this was about?" I dropped my phone, my hands shaking. The room spun around me as the weight of his words sank in. Emily had lied. She'd ruined my life because she couldn't stand that. For once, I wasn't invisible. The memories flooded back. The accusations. The cold stares from my dad. Deborah tearing through my room, looking for evidence that didn't exist. My dad calling me a disgrace and kicking me out over lies. All of it. Every painful moment had been because of Emily's twisted need to be the center of attention. I wanted to scream, cry, throw something. The anger that had simmered inside me for years boiled over, and I couldn't contain it anymore. Liam's message continued. "If you want to confront her, I'll back you up. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I stared at my phone, torn between two conflicting urges. Part of me wanted to march straight to my dad's house and force them to hear the truth. I wanted to make them see the damage they had done, to shove Emily's confession in their faces and demand an apology. But another part of me, the part that had spent years rebuilding my life, knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was already done. My dad and Deborah had made their choice. They had chosen to believe Emily over me, to cast me out without a second thought. An apology wouldn't erase the years of pain and isolation. After a long pause, I typed back to Liam, "Thanks for telling me. But I don't need to confront her. I've moved on." It wasn't entirely true. I hadn't moved on, not completely, but I was trying. And I wasn't going to let Emily or anyone else drag me back into that toxic cycle. In the days that followed, I thought about that message constantly. The weight of Emily's lies was something I had carried alone for so long, and now, finally, I had proof that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the villain they had painted me to be, but knowing the truth didn't make the pain disappear. It only made me angrier. One night, I sat with Ryan and told him everything. I hadn't shared all the details before. I couldn't bring myself to relive it, but now, with Emily's confession hanging over me, I needed to let it out. Ryan listened quietly, holding my hand as I spoke. When I finished, he shook his head in disbelief. "She destroyed your life, and your dad let her do it." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I spent years trying to prove I wasn't the person they thought I was, but it never mattered. They never wanted to believe me. Ryan pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. "You don't need their validation, Lauren. You've built a life without them. You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for." Hearing those words I had needed to hear for so long, finally made something inside me shift. For years, I had been chasing a sense of worth that my family would never give me. I had been waiting for them to see me, to acknowledge my pain, to apologize, but I didn't need their apology anymore. I was done waiting. The day my dad called, I knew something was off. I hadn't heard from him in years, so seeing his name pop up on my phone made my heart race. I hesitated before answering, already bracing for whatever guilt-laden plea he had prepared. "Lauren," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "We need to talk." I clenched my jaw. About what? There was a pause. About Emily? She told us the truth. About everything. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I clutched my phone, the words hanging in the air. After all these years, the truth had finally come out. My dad, who had called me a disgrace, who had believed every lie Emily told, was now admitting that he'd been wrong. "I'm sorry," he continued. "I should have listened to you. I should have trusted you." I wanted to feel relieved. I wanted to believe that this was the moment I had been waiting for, but all I felt was anger. "You're sorry?" I said, my voice shaking. "Do you have any idea what your choices did to me? You didn't just believe her lies. You let them destroy my life. You threw me out like I was nothing." "I know," he said quietly. "I can't take back what happened, but I want to fix things." I laughed bitterly. "Fix things? You can't fix this, Dad. You believed her over me. You let me walk out that door without even questioning it. You made your choice." There was silence on the other end. I could hear him sigh, hear the weight of his regret, but it wasn't enough. "I'm not doing this for you," I added. "I'm done chasing after your approval. I've built a life without you, without any of you, and for the first time, I'm happy." "Lauren," his voice cracked. "Please." But I wasn't that scared, desperate teenager anymore. I didn't need his validation. I didn't need his apologies. I had spent years waiting for this moment, only to realize I didn't care anymore. "You need to live with your choices," I said firmly, "just like I've lived with mine." I hung up before he could say anything else. That night, I sat with Ryan on our balcony, watching the sunset. I told him about the call, about my dad's apology, about how it felt to finally hear him admit the truth. Ryan listened, his hand resting on mine, his thumb gently tracing circles on my skin. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I nodded. "I think I am." For so long, I had been carrying the weight of my family's betrayal, letting it shape who I was. But in that moment, with Ryan by my side, I realized that I wasn't defined by their choices. I wasn't the broken girl they had left behind. I was stronger than that. I had rebuilt my life on my terms, with people who loved me for who I was. My family's approval. Their apologies? They didn't matter anymore. What mattered was me. Ryan squeezed my hand. "You're free now." And he was right. I had spent too long trying to fix something that was never mine to fix. I had clung to the hope that my dad would see me, believe me, and love me the way I needed him to. But I didn't need that anymore. I had chosen myself, and for the first time, I felt truly free.